So welcome to our webinar, everybody. The aim of this webinar is to give you tips on how you can cut back on meetings, but at the same time maximise the impacts of the meetings that you do have and stop your inbox driving you crazy with endless emails. So just before we start, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and we'll share this recording with you. We also want to make this a really interactive webinar. So anytime at all, please jump on with your questions. You can ask those in the chat or just raise your hand with the chat button, which you'll just see at the top of the screen there. I'd like to start off with an acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this online session is hosted and the traditional custodians of the lands where our participants are located. I'm on Ngarigo country and love to, if you put in the chat what country you're on too. We'd like to pay our respect to elders past, present and future. So to get you all involved in this webinar right from the get-go, we're going to ask a few questions with a quick poll. And this is about your current email habits and your meeting habits. And then later on in the webinar, Emily's going to show you how you can actually see what your current habits are. And, you know, you might actually be surprised. But we'll come to that. So Laurie's going to show you what the data tells us about how we're currently using email and meetings, and Claudia's going to give you the practical tips and the tricks on how you can reduce your reliance on email and meetings, along with a lot of takeaways too, so definitely hang around for those. So just a very quick introduction. Emily, on the next slide. So we've got with us Claudia, who on my screen's right at the left-hand side there she is. And Claudia is the Chief Marketing Officer at Engage Squared. But Claudia's got a very long history of working on all these M365 products as well. I'll let Claudia do more of an introduction soon. Emily O'Brien, who's Swoop's Director for Customer Success for APAC, and Dr. Lawrence Lockley, who's Swoop Analytics Chief Scientist, and myself, I'm the Director of Communications for Swoop. So I am going to pass over to Emily to start with a poll to get you all involved, and we'll find out what some of your habits are.
Thanks, Sharon. And if you're familiar with these sessions that we run, you know that we always have to do a poll to get you warmed up and to get you in the mood for a bit of discussion. And I'm sure we'll have some time to do that towards the end of the session today as well. So to get involved in some of the questions, we've got the QR code on the screen. Alternatively, you can also head to menti.com and there's a code there, but you'll see in a moment that that code sort of transfer over onto the next screen. So I'll just give you all a few seconds to get online with the poll. The purpose of the poll, as Sharon mentioned, is I want you to really think about the way that your current habits are looking on M365, but more specifically for today, looking at emails and meeting habits, which might be confronting for some people, I'm feeling. So in that case, I'm just going to head into the questions now. And we can see for our first question, we're wanting to find out how many emails do you send a day, or maybe think about it on, you know, on average or just for a typical day for you. The interesting part about this is that just when we finish these questions, is I'm going to hand over to Laurie to actually show you the real results when we look at some of our benchmarking across the board. So thanks for the people who are submitting some answers now. We can see the vast majority seem to be sending around 3 to 30 emails a day, some even more. Some people are really going crazy on the emails still and living in email with 30 to 70, and also a handful who have less than 5 emails. So we'll move on to, well, it's good to see that at the moment there's nobody sending more than 70 emails. I feel like that's a bit intense, but maybe we'll find a few outliers in our benchmarking as well. The next question, I want you to think about how many minutes do you participate in meetings each day? Again, let's sort of take this on average across the entire week. It looks like we've got some results coming in. We've got some people who are in, you know, 10 minutes to 60 minutes. Quite a lot seem to be in more than 120 minutes of meetings. a few sort of on that sort of higher end of the scale. And again, I'm hoping you're going to be a little bit surprised by what we've found in some of the benchmarking that Laurie will talk to in just a moment. So thank you for submitting those answers. And then I just want you to sort of stop and reflect again. Do you think you overestimated how much time you're spending in meetings, or how much you're spending, how much email you're sending? Do you think you maybe underestimated a bit, or were you very honest? Okay, so I'm thinking that they've maybe underestimated. We've got a lot of honest people. I appreciate that. Also, keep in mind this is completely anonymous, so you can be truthful with us. We have someone who's overestimated. And this is just to get you to sort of really reflect on those habits, and we can sort of back that up with the data. Of course, you'll get an opportunity to see how you can actually measure this in real time. For the final question, I just wanted to know as well if you're currently using Microsoft Teams channels to collaborate asynchronously, so outside of the realm of meetings as well. It's good to see that the majority so far that they are using Microsoft Teams meetings, but it also sounds like a lot when you're, if you're sending a lot of email, you're spending a lot of time in meetings, also using Teams channels. Maybe you've already got the balance right. There's a handful there that aren't using Teams channels, which is okay. I'm sure you'll have some great tips you can take away from today. In saying that, now we sort of have a bit of a current state of play for the people tuned in today. Laurie, I'm going to bring you into the conversation now to talk a little bit. Well, let me just sort of readjust the slides to talk to some of the data and what we found across people's meeting and email habits. So over to you, Laurie.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Well, this might surprise you, but what we're doing with Swoop is we have a new product called Swoop for M365, and we actually draw the data from the Microsoft reports, the admin reports. And they measure nearly everything, if you like. So, in essence, what we see, and at the moment I've sampled like nearly 40,000 people across 9 organisations that at least had one call or meeting in the last 6 months, right? So we know they're not dead accounts or anything like that. We know they've been active at some point in time. So in some ways, this is a bit of a generous sort of view of the situation. Only 1% of those had been in meetings for more than 120 minutes. Right? So if you are actually in meetings more than 120 minutes, you are actually, at least compared to this sample, in the top 1%. Right? So, and then 4%, so you can see this long tail, we call this like a long tail distribution. There's in fact 66% of people that are actually in synchronous mode less than 10 minutes a day. So it can be quite surprising. Now, I think the people that tend to come to our webinars tend to be up that long tail end, the 1 or 4%. But the interesting thing is that, the top 10% are responsible for over half of all meeting time spent. Right? Just think about that a little bit. So when we think about the long tail distributions, we first started talking about this when Amazon started, selling books, and they talked about the ability to sort of mine the long tail, because the trend in your most favorite book or your favorite or the biggest selling book or the biggest selling movie is that it gets all the attention, and then there's a long tail of other movies or other books that get very little. So we're seeing this network effect in this data as well. And it does show that each of you are actually getting, those that are in the 1%, are you really in the 1%? And that was the idea of the question about, did you underestimate or overestimate? I'd encourage you to go back, those that think you're in more than 120 or 2 hours of meetings a day, go back and have a look at your calendar and see if that's the case. I'm not questioning whether you feel like you've been in meetings all day. In fact, you probably have felt like you're in meetings all day, but that is another issue, right? So if in fact you feel like you've been in meetings all day and you really haven't been in meetings all day, then, the issue is not in the number of meetings, but how you feel about the meetings that you are in. Perhaps they're interrupting you, perhaps they're, you over prepare, or you prepare too much, you feel they're too disruptive, all sorts of things like that. This one is the email equivalent. The tail is not quite as dramatic. And I think in the poll, nobody said more than 70 emails sent, but in fact 9% of 60,000 people had actually sent more than 70 emails a day on average. Right? So that's huge, isn't it? I think some of the bigger ones, you're in that 21%. But again, we see this long tail distribution effect. The top 10%, and you can say that's really the bar on the greater than 70, responsible 41% of all emails sent. Right. So this is just to paint the picture for you that it is important. I should emphasise that those people that are sending the most emails or attending the most meetings typically are at the centre of your network. Right. So they typically are the most important people in the organisation. So I don't want to back away from the fact that it's a small number. We shouldn't care about them. In fact, we find in the network science that you pull those people out of a network and everything collapses. So we definitely have to worry about this. But the other point I want to make is that it is a small proportion of the whole organisation. So let's move on, Emily. So now this is the 7 digital collaboration habits that are part of Swoop for M365.
Laurie, can I just butt in with one question just related to the last one? Matt's just asking, could people be counting calls as meetings? So on those stats that you were just showing us, was that just meetings, or does that take into account calls and meetings? Calls
and meetings. It's any synchronous activity, in fact. And in fact, calls and meetings pretty much in Teams it's audio minutes actually. So whether you turn the video on or not, it's counted as an audio minute. So that's the reporting. The reporting on audio is your calls and your meetings. It's basically a synchronous activity. So in terms of when we came up with the 7 collaboration habits, Swoop, I guess at Swoop, we've always had a preference for prioritising knowledge sharing and also, and working out loud. I guess knowledge sharing, working out loud, those are the things that we continuously hear from consulting partners that this is best practice. And when we saw how people were using initially Teams and very much using the Skype features of chat and calls and meetings and not the asynchronous things, we felt that this is a habit that people need to sort of change. Now, the reason we call it habits is that the way you work digitally isn't something that senior management can impact directly easily by just mandating thou shalt use less email or thou shalt go to less meetings. It's a personal habit, so in essence, we framed these as habits that you needed to balance. So we aren't saying you should never chat or you should never use email or you shouldn't go to meetings or anything like that. But in your role, you should develop the right sort of balance between these habits. The top 3, the email liberated, the chat liberated, and the asynchronous collaborator are all related to how much you use the discussion, asynchronous discussion elements of team channels and Yammer against direct chat, email, and meetings. And certainly with chat and email, our research tells us that, that's mainly one-on-one. So you're really not sharing broadly, you're sharing just one-on-one. Very inefficient way of sharing knowledge. The community collaborator is, just one back. The community collaborator is really the way you use Yammer versus Teams, which is always a hot topic in our webinars. And then the last 3 are really 2 of them are related to habits within meetings, screen sharing and camera on. And the last one I think is popular for the content people, how much are you using OneDrive versus SharePoint. But today we're concentrating on the email and the asynchronous collaborator habits. So as I said, we look at these habits as a balance. It's not so much you remove one completely or aim to, but find the right balance for you. So overall, all things being equal, we want to see less emails sent and more Yammer and Teams channels messages internally sent. And we promote the idea of not using email for internal communications. Now, if you're a customer-facing role, well then you would expect to have more email, and that's fine. But I think if you're not customer-facing or you don't need to send a lot of external emails, there really isn't any excuse for sending emails internally. So next slide.
Laurie, just to clarify there, when you're saying Teams channels messages, you're meaning like a post in a Teams channel? Is that not rather than chat? Yes.
Rather than chat, yeah. So it's what we call the discussion asynchronous. Chat, in essence, that technically you could say it's asynchronous, but there is an expectation that chat is synchronous. When you put a chat message in, out, the expectation is the person's going to reply very, very quickly. So the challenge across this whole space is that we're moving from a very low base, so what we found in the data, like this is 57,000 people from the 9 organisations that have at least sort of participated in emailing. 71% didn't send a single Yammer or Teams channel message. Now, they may have read or they may have liked, but we don't see that as strong enough to say you've participated in a discussion. 11% said one or more Yammer Teams or channels message for every 100 emails. So that's a lot of emails. So the last one we said, well, 2.7%, a very small amount, sent at least one of the asynchronous message for every 10 emails. Now that still might seem a lot, but we've got to start somewhere. So we're sort of setting the bar and saying, all right, well, let's just try and do the one for every 10 emails. So every 10 emails is sent, just check whether you've actually, sent an internal channel message. And I don't think that's a particularly high bar to reach. So that's where we're coming from in terms of email. I think next slide, Emily. All right, so I want to sort of step back now, because what we realised is that there's no real shortage of guidance in what these habits should be. I mean, you can read many, many papers about, how you should work asynchronously and how you should reduce your email and reduce your meetings and so forth. So I think it's a little bit like, how do you sort of lose weight or how do you eat healthily? There's a lot of information out there, but there's a knowing doing gap, if you like. There's a gap between what we know and actually doing it, and that's really habits. So a while ago I decided to dig deep into well what literature's out there around habits and how you change habits, and I came across this fellow James Clear, who wrote this book recently called Atomic Habits. Interestingly enough, when I was looking last night again at best-selling books, this book is actually the best-selling book on Amazon in 2021. Now, I didn't pick it for that. I just picked it because it was about habits, but I was quite surprised last night when I found that this was the best-selling book. So obviously, it's something that people are thinking about. How do you change habits? Now, here's a very simple framework. One thing I might say that is a little bit controversial. He says that goals really don't matter. You can have bad habits and you can have the right goals, but you've still got bad habits. He's very much into the 1% improvement every day. If you can improve 1% every day, over a period of a few weeks, all of a sudden you improve 10%, or something like that. He has this model of cues, cravings, response and rewards that he talks to about how you actually manage behaviours, and that simple table on the left that says when it comes to a cue, and a cue might be what triggers me to go to email, for example. It could be that you're in a habit of looking at your email when you first sit down to start the day, or it could be that every time you get a Bing notification, you'll open your email client. So that's your cue. And clearly, for a good habit, you may think good habits obvious, which could be turn off the notifications for email, or to break a bad habit, you make it invisible. So in fact, turning off notifications doesn't make email invisible, but at least it makes it less visible. And of course, then you can go through the cravings, response, and reward. It's an interesting exercise to go through these and think about your own cues and cravings and responses and rewards. And think about things that I've got a hint there, like, don't have your morning coffee, until you've sent your first Yammer or channel message. Or if you sent an email before 10 o'clock, don't have coffee at all, or something like that. So these are habits that you can sort of work out yourself. And Claudia will probably come up with some, or she'll present some that I'm sure you can also work with. So next slide, Emily. Okay, so when it comes to the asynchronous worker, that really is the thing about timing meetings and calls and working asynchronously through the Yammer channels and Teams channels. And we've found that it's through Yammer and Teams that most of the asynchronous sharing of knowledge happens. And we also found that those people that use those channels also tend to use SharePoint more, right? So they tend to be people that tend to live with Teams channels and Yammer, tend to work with content more, people that live in meetings and calls tend not to use those content areas as much. So it's nearly like a persona, if you like, that we're seeing. And we need to have a balance, and there are some organisations that people are actually balancing quite well, but certainly the ones that we're looking at now, it tends to be unbalanced. So we want to obviously push the time you spend in meetings down and push the time you spend in asynchronous communication up. So as I said, it's a balance, and we are setting targets for these based on what we see is the top 20% of our reference set. So we have a reference set that's growing. At the moment, it's got 70,000 people in it and 9 organisations. We expect by the time we do our benchmarking report for M365, that will probably be in the hundreds of thousands and maybe 20 or 30 organisations. So we'll have a very strong set, which you can compare yourself against. So in terms of the challenge, sort of in people that at least have attended a meeting or a call, 45,000 of that 70,000 had reported that. 65% hadn't yet sent a Yammer message or a Teams channel. So we've got a big percentage of people that just don't even know about Yammer or Teams channels. Right? 5% sent one or more, let's call it asynchronous messages for every 8 hours of meetings. Right? So that's a lot of meetings to only send one asynchronous message. 2%, so we're down in the 2% now, one or more message for every 60 minutes of meeting. So every time you have a meeting, like this is a meeting, you should at least, if you send one Yammer message or team channel message, you're already in the top 2%. Right? So we're setting the bar about there. So it's a pretty low bar, I'd say, but we'll move that bar over time, as you do if you're in your fitness tracker. I won't go through this. I think I'm going to leave this to Claudia because she's going to cover some of that. But I think the other good news is looking at those sort of big challenges, they look nearly impossible. But what we do know from network effects, and we've certainly learnt that through COVID, is that when things move in a network way, they move very fast. So once you see organisations starting to adopt good digital practices, people are influenced by other people, and you get this exponential effect. So I'm confident, and we've certainly seen it in leading organisations, that once you get people demonstrating good behaviour, other people will follow. So we certainly look forward to seeing our clients sort of improve their digital behaviours as they sort of learn from each other, and in fact our reference set across the board. So I think that's my bit, and if you've got any questions, certainly pop them in the chat. But I'll hand back over now to Emily to pass on.
I will be handing over to Claudia now.
Yep.
Thanks, Claudia.
Thanks, Laurie. Super insightful as always. And hi, everyone. Welcome to the call. And how ironic that we're all on a meeting to talk about reducing meetings. But anyway, here we are. So I just wanted to say before I kind of dive into my slides, I'm loving the conversation in the chat. So keep your experiences coming and answer questions. We'll try and answer as many as we can, and hopefully we'll have time at the end as well for some discussion. I thought I'd start by kind of talking about the good news and before I give you some ideas that you can walk away with and use within your organisation, thought it'd be good to do some retrospective reflection. I think it's fair to say that we're kind of 2 years into the biggest human experiment of our lifetime, and we're really in the middle of making some pretty major changes to the fabric of how we do business and how we show up to work. And I think it's important to recognise that everyone is trying to work out what all of this means, right? So no one has hybrid working sorted out, and if they tell you that they do, they're lying to you. No one has a perfect digital working model, and there's also no one-size-fits-all solution to this challenge. We are, whether we like it or not, all in the same leaky boat. But the good news is you, as individuals, and also the organisations that you work for, have proven that you're capable of adapting to some pretty serious and fast change. If you think about it, if someone had told you when you were young and living the good life in 2019 that you'd move to a completely remote working model within the space of a few short months, how many of you would have actually believed that your organisation was up for that challenge, right? especially if you work in government or financial institutions or any highly regulated organisation. If there was a kind of a transformative initiative or idea like that to say, hey, let's move all of our staff to a remote working model, it would have absolutely been slowed down by all the things that we see as kind of issues, the perceived risk, the cost, the time and effort, the resourcing, the perceived culture impact it would have to our people. These are all reasons to not change, but here we are today, all connecting with each other from all corners of the country and in fact across APAC. And we're making it work, in our respective patches. And I think that's pretty awesome and definitely something to kind of give yourself a pat on the back on and remember. So I'd ask you to kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at something as transformative as shifting email and meeting culture within your organization, because as Laurie mentioned, like these are really deeply ingrained habits. Email has been used for decades and decades within organizations. It's easy, it's what we know, it's really advanced technology, so it's what people will go to. So just remember that, even though that habit is there and it's deeply ingrained, change is possible. You just have to create the right environment for it to happen. So moving on to a little bit of bad news. We've changed where we work, but we haven't changed how we work. And let's be real, like we've always had a problem with emails and meetings. That wasn't something that came with the pandemic. Over the last 2 years, though, I think what we have seen is that these habits have gotten worse and have been amplified by the challenges of remote working. We've leaned in a little bit too hard on, these familiar and easy working habits and have kind of finally reached that tipping point where it's starting to harm productivity and well-being and culture. And I think if you're a leader, if you look at some of the recent research and studies, for example, the Work Trends Index by Microsoft or the Treasury research on the Great Reshuffle or the Great Resignation, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, we can see that there's some really big challenges on our hands when it comes to retaining great talent and also attracting new ones. And much of the dissatisfaction that people are facing at work today kind of stems from that feeling of being overwhelmed because they're stuck in the busyness of meetings and emails, and they don't actually have enough dedicated time for the doing and the quality outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So they're feeling like they don't have a big enough network of people that they can connect with. They're feeling like their leaders are out of touch with what matters to them. And then on top of that, there's the small things, right? Like when you're in a meeting, and I'm sure you've all experienced this before, and you feel like you're talking in a black hole because everyone has their cameras off and everyone is muted. Or you're feeling the pressure to respond to an email or a chat message straight away. All of those small things can kind of culminate into that poor employee experience and really harm your working culture. At Engage Squared, we're absolutely not immune to those challenges. This year, we've got a really big focus on our ways of working, and we've decided to kind of throw the rule book out and start again. So we've got a focus on looking at our asynchronous communication from the very top down. So even our CEO, Stephen Monk, he's looking at reevaluating meetings that he's part of and the meetings that we're having and the purpose and quality of those calls and what channels we're using to collaborate with each other, and even doing a spring clean of our Microsoft Teams environment so that we're getting rid of old groups and also bringing some consistency to what channels we're using within Teams and also the purpose of those channels within our broader digital ecosystem as well. So I thought I'd share some of the tips or kind of the things that we're doing internally at Engage Squared to improve how we're working and align it to Swoop's 7 collaboration habits, because we've really embraced this at Engage Squared, and I think it's a really great way to center a discussion around collaboration and communication. Even when you're doing, personally reflecting at your own habits or with your team or your organization. So one of the first ways we're doing this is from a chat perspective, setting some expectations around response times. So I'm not going to reply to you straight away because I'm busy working, I'm doing things. And I think we've kind of forgotten that, right? When we're all in the office together, I'd kind of, if it was working with Sharon, I'd pop my head over and, check if she's busy, and you'd almost kind of second guess whether you should go and interrupt that person or not. But I think within a digital environment, we've forgotten that and how disruptive interruptions can be. So we're really trying to focus on setting expectations around response times. Also giving people guidance on when to use chat versus when to use channel. That's really important as well. I think chat definitely has its place for that, you know, kind of semi-immediate conversation that you can have with people versus channels where you feel like you've got a little bit more space to breathe and you can go into that message when you're ready. From an asynchronous collaboration perspective, we're really encouraging working out loud, the use of channel messages, providing guidance on how to use our other systems. So we've got a CRM at Engage Squared that we use to capture notes about our clients and our projects and things like that. So instead of scheduling a meeting to align on what's happening with X customer, we're really pushing for people to just add good quality notes to that project, so that you can go in there and you can find out about what's happening straight away instead of having to call that meeting. We're also empowering staff to say no, especially if you're listed as optional. If you feel like you've got a little bit of FOMO, which I know was kind of spoken about a bit in the chat, maybe think about recording some meetings so that people can watch it in their own time. Interestingly, I was on a call with an executive in a large government department earlier this week, and he was saying, I'm sick of being in alignment calls. I feel like 80% of the calls I'm on are just alignment meetings so that people can tell me what they're doing. So I'm spending literally about a day a week, times that by about 200 executives that work at this organisation in alignment calls. Wouldn't it be great if we could just have a 15-minute update instead of having, you know, death by PowerPoint, a recorded update to say, hey, this is what I'm working on. Here's the key takeaways for you, and that executive can listen to it in their own time, you know, even when they're out on a walk. So thinking about things a little bit differently from a meetings perspective, making meeting agendas mandatory so that you know the purpose of the call. I think we've all forgotten how important agendas are, and also automatically shortening default meeting times. So that you've got breaks to have a drink of water, go to the toilet, get yourself a drink, or whatever you need to do between calls instead of just being back to back. From a file sharing perspective, I have to say, and Engage Squared, we've always been pretty good at that. But I think, you know, in terms of what we're really trying to push for is storing shared documents in Teams. So OneDrive has its place and your personal network drives have their place, but make sure you store your documents in a shared space, and also sharing document links. So you're bringing people to the information rather than sending that information out. And that includes how you collaborate with external colleagues as well. So there's obviously lots of security and permission things that you can put around that to make sure that that information is safe. Camera confidence. So we really do encourage the use of cameras on meetings and reinforcing the value of non-verbal communication. You know, even seeing people nod while you're talking kind of makes you feel like what you're saying is, you know, they're hearing what you're saying and they're engaged with what you're saying as well. From a screen sharing perspective, you know, obviously sharing screens like I'm doing now where it's relevant, but also, you know, putting in links so that you can collaborate in real time during the call. So loop components are really new. If they may have hit your tenant. If not, they may be hitting your tenant soon, but real-time notes that you can take together in a call so that you've got momentum and you're making the most value out of the meetings that you are having. Reigniting the use of Yammer. So we're trying to make sure that not everything goes into Teams because we don't want to crowd that space with too much information. So making sure that we use our enterprise social network to call, you know, expand our internal networks, praise people that are doing good work, and also just share knowledge with each other. And lastly, email liberation. So providing guidance to people around when to use email versus when to use other systems. So for example, again, going back to my story about CRMs and kind of capturing notes there, instead of sending people an email update, because we all know, you know, if email is where information goes to die, putting that in a place where it's accessible by people at a later stage. So these are some of the things that we're doing at Engage Squared, aligned to Swoop's 7 collaboration habits. In terms of how you can think about transforming culture within your organisation. We all know change happens at the individual level. And I know that sounds super cheesy, but it really does start with you. So the things that you can do at an individual level is, firstly, start a conversation. So chat to your team. When was the last time you did actually have a conversation with your team about the way you guys are collaborating together? Are the channels that we have still useful? Do we need to change it up a little bit? Ask yourself before you schedule a meeting, do I actually need that meeting? Does this need to be an email? Could another channel work more effectively? Could I just pick up the phone and give that person a quick 5-minute call instead of blocking out half an hour of their time? Next, use the tech. So I'm a big one for, I love rules in Outlook. I'm sure some of you use that, but if you don't, get onto it and use it to automatically clean up your inbox. So even things like, your pay slips or messages about certain subjects or from certain people, get Outlook to do the hard work of automatically categorizing that and, putting it into folders for you. Also use your status in Teams. So I quite often will put into Teams that, as a status message, I'm doing some focus work. So I'm shutting down Teams and Outlook. I'm not going to be responding to you for a little while. Call me if it's urgent, and I'll put my mobile number in there as well. So don't be afraid to use the tech and use things like status messages to help you there. And then lastly, this is actually something that I heard from KPMG, have well-being non-negotiables, which I think is a really big one. And for me, I'm a parent, I've got 2 young kids. My well-being non-negotiable is that I will not work past 6 p.m. or on weekends because I need time to be with my children and obviously have my life outside of work. So communicate your boundaries around your working hours, set expectations around response times, and also schedule focus time too. So make sure you use those features that exist within the platform. I think Microsoft are fantastic in how much they're infusing well-being into technology. I don't think we would have all expected that to be a thing, but it certainly is, and you should be kind of leveraging that as much as possible. From an organisational perspective, the things that you can do to transform culture, and this is the biggest one, I think it was mentioned in the chat as well, is that executive sponsorship. So you really need to coach leaders how to walk the walk. And I guarantee you there is not an executive on this planet who would say that they enjoy spending their days in back-to-back meetings, right? Or that they love reading all the hundreds of emails that they get. They're probably one of the most affected groups when it comes to having too many emails and too many meetings. So coach your leaders on how to collaborate in different ways. Ask them to be champions of what good collaboration looks like, and ask them to empower other leaders in your organisation to do the same thing as well. Make it easy for people. So use principles of nudge theory. If you've never heard of nudge theory before, Google it. It's fantastic, and I think can definitely be used from a tech perspective. So you can update your default policies, right? So update your meeting policies. Maybe you can set a default setting there so that it automatically shortens meetings for people. Your policies around external and guest access for sharing links. So you can make it easy for people to send a document link rather than attachment. These are all really small ways that you can encourage people to form good habits without them having to think about it. And also giving them which tool when guidance. So think about all the systems that you're using in your organisation, even beyond the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, how it all fits together, and give them some guidance on that. Lastly, review your people and culture policies. So if you've updated your policies around flexible working hours, ask yourself if you actually have created an environment for people to actually live that policy. So what's the guidance you're giving to people, or the expectation that you're setting for working hours? And what does asynchronous communication and collaboration look like for your organisation? Make sure that's really clear if you do have a flexible working policy. And also code of conduct, the expectations for being online, again, the response times, all of these things. If you haven't put that into your code of conduct policies, make sure you get your people and culture team to look at that and reassess what that looks like for your organisation in our current state of play, if you will. So the thing I would kind of leave you with here is that now is absolutely the time to be reviewing your working habits. I think 2 years in, we're kind of settled to the fact that, yep, this is going to be the norm for the foreseeable. So the power also really sits with employees. If we think about the great reshuffle, etc., the expectations for, supporting flexible working and hybrid working is only going to grow. So the time to be thinking about key things like how you're using email and your meeting habits and your kind of broader virtual culture is really now. So with that, I'll pass over to Emily to talk about how you can use Swoop within your organisation to support some of this.
Thanks, Claudia. So coming up on your screen shortly, or now, you'll see the Swoop for M365 dashboard. And I know we've done a lot of talking today already about understanding the current state of play and having a real good sort of think and reflect on what this might look like for your current collaboration habits. And if you really wanted to put the data behind that and really put some numbers behind it, well, then this is where Swoop for M365 comes in terms of being able to see how that comes to life across those 7 different collaboration habits. And I know today, of course, we've been focusing in on the email liberated and the asynchronous collaborator habits as well. So I know, the problem that we're hearing so loudly from all of the customers and organisations that we talk to is that there's been this massive uptake of Microsoft Teams, but then people really are taking these old habits with them, exactly what Claudia was talking to. And we really did think that the pandemic would be a huge driver for hybrid working and allowing people to work remotely and in the office. But this vision just hasn't come to life. And I'm sure that sort of resonates with you on some level. So for what we're looking at here on the screen, this is really looking to solve that what tool when challenge, which we find is still so prevalent across all of the organisations that we're talking to. So not only be able to see this at the organisational level, if we're looking at some of these specific dashboards over here, also going into specific segments and seeing where, maybe there's a particular department that's championing these really great balanced collaborative behaviours, but then all the way down to the personal level, change starting at the individual, that cheesy line again, but you do have the ability to see what that looks like for yourself on the individual level. And for me right now, I am feeling a little bit vulnerable because you're seeing exactly how I am collaborating in M365 as an employee at Swoop. And thankfully, the results actually look relatively good. And there's a few reasons why that is the case, of course. But if we do have a quick look at some of these habits here in terms of email liberated and how good I am at collaborating across Teams channels and how much email I'm sending, it is a little bit interesting. If you look at the nature of my role, I do send a lot of email. I am collaborating externally with customers, with partners. It's happening all the time. But this doesn't necessarily mean that I am living in email. It just means that I'm balancing that email collaboration with the Teams and the Yammer collaboration as well. And when I deep dive into those insights a little bit further, I can see here that for every 4 emails that I send, I'm also sending a Teams channel message or a Yammer message. And then I can also see what that lines up with in terms of this what good looks like, which for the email liberated measure and what we've found with some of the benchmarking data we've already looked at is that, ideally you want to be sending less than 5 emails for every channel or Yammer message that you're sending. And then also, well, this is kind of the first iteration of the product. We'll then be able to sort of add in some of these more praises and nudges just to give you a little preview if this is all loaded up on the screen in terms of giving me some more specific insights and tips on the individual level. So, for example, I can see that I'm doing quite a good job here at Swoop at the moment, and also sort of unlocking these achievements and seeing what that looks like across a rolling 30-day period, and if I'm improving my email liberated score or if I'm potentially going backwards. But back to this dashboard here again. For the asynchronous collaborator one, again, the score is looking relatively good, and then also being able to see that I have been in 23 minutes of Teams meetings for every 1 team channel message or Yammer message as well. You've got that benchmark to be able to understand what good looks like, and then also giving some more active tips on how to improve. But that will sort of also improve as this product continues to be developed. So I guess the key point for those 2 particular habits, it's definitely not about not sending email. It's about not only sending emails, and it's not about not having meetings. It's about not only having meetings. And then once you have these sorts of insights, you then have the ability to sort of run whole education campaigns around teaching people to look at these habits. And then they're also being quite targeted in the way that you're looking at as well. I did mention that, of course, I do have some quite strong results here, but I think that's also a testament to the way that Swoop operates as an organisation. We are very small, so I do need to flag that. I know it can be very difficult for larger organisations, and that change can take a little bit longer. But we are also, we were born digital and born remote, so we have always worked from home, but it is definitely significantly more difficult if we're looking at, desk-bound workers, and of course, all the way up until the pandemic has all been unfolding. It takes longer and it's a little bit more difficult. This is an example of what good looks like, and I'm just going to very briefly show you what not so good also looks like. And this is looking at anonymous data from an organisation that we have permission to share what this looks like for them. So this is looking at across the entire enterprise. So if you're looking at that from the lens of the personal level, where I was doing quite good, you can still have pockets of your organisation that are doing a really good job. But looking at this from a very broad level, for example, in the email liberated measure, this particular organisation is performing in sort of the lower end of our benchmarking study. If I look at the insights, we can see that across the board, people have sent 174 emails for every Teams channel message. So if we're going back to that idea of getting that ratio right and getting the balance right, this isn't quite ringing true to lots of the different tips and the habits that we've spoken to today. And very similar thinking with the asynchronous collaborator, we can see that people have been in Teams meetings for 293 minutes for every Teams channel message or Yammer message, which I think is probably even more shocking. These are looking at quite significant numbers if you, again, going back to that balance. So looking at some of this data, I want you to really think about what potentially would be the behaviours to work on within your organisation. Of course, that would make it, if it's powered by Swoop, that will make it much easier for you to figure out what those habits would be, but also where you would want to be targeting those interventions as well. Being able to go into that segments dashboard and seeing what particular parts of the business are doing, the parts that aren't doing so well, the parts that are doing much better. So yes, as we're moving into this age of hybrid work, of course, I might just leave it on that point for you to have a think about. Sharon, I might just hand back to you, actually. I do have a quick slide here just in case people are interested in having a look at what this might be like for their organisations too.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So what if you would like to try the Swoop for M365 that Emily was just showing you, the real value that we've often found is once you firstly seeing your own personal collaboration habits, you'll be surprised. I think, Claudia, you made some changes after seeing your own personal dashboard. But the other thing is we can actually highlight some of the showcase performers within your organisation, and it's a really great way to then see some best practices that are already happening within your organisation, tapping into those people and sharing that with others in the organisation. So we've got an offer on at the moment. Laurie and I are preparing our first ever Swoop for M365 benchmarking report, and we've got up until the 18th of March if anyone wants to get involved in it. So this would give you a free trial of Swoop. And at the same time, Laurie would do you a personal custom benchmarking report. So in that, he will actually pick out who are your top collaborators, who are your top departments within your organisation. So it's 100% free to join, and everything is confidential as well. So none of your data will be exposed to anyone else. It's all anonymous. So there's a QR code there. If anyone would like to join in, we'd love to have you, but it is up until March 18. Now I'd love to open up to questions. We've had lots of questions coming in. I think a lot of these questions were answered in the chat, but Matt, would you be happy to jump in? I know you were talking about returning to the office. Do you want to jump in and just ask those questions, please?
Yeah, sure can. So our organisation is I would say probably rather progressive for a financial institution, in that we have communicated to our staff a flexible policy arrangement of working and what that looks like. However, there's going to be pockets of our organisation, and I fear I'm working in one of those pockets, where it's going to be a little bit more prescriptive, whereby it's, yeah, here's the flexible organisation, here's the flexible operations that we work under. However, there will be leaders who, if they prefer to work in a particular style, will try and coach people into more of the, you must be in 2 days a week, we must see your faces 2 days a week in the office. I'm happy for that social interaction. I miss it. I want it. I love the commute to work as well, just as a change from the four walls that I see here all the time. But I also know that going back to the office for the sake of going back to the office is not the answer either. So what's everyone's opinions on how to get that balance right, how to coach people who just want to return to those bad habits because that's what they're used to and that's what they're comfortable with?
Yeah, it's so hard. And I think for us, and I don't know if you saw my reply in the chat, Matt, but I was talking about the fact that we're having the same discussions at Engage Squared at the moment. And we want to give people flexibility. I think it's about, you have to treat people like adults. Otherwise, they're going to walk. Like they're going to go somewhere else that will give them that flexibility, right? So I think it's just about encouraging them and giving them, like, creating spaces where they can be most productive. So at the moment, we're doing a bit of an office revamp, still in the early days of planning, but having more purpose-built collaboration spaces instead of just going to the office to sit at your desk and then be on virtual meetings all day. Like, what's the point of that, right? But yeah, so we are trying to kind of revamp our office to entice people back in. Also, just do fun things like we were talking about yesterday, having a coffee, creating a bit of a coffee policy. So having a tab with our favourite coffee shop where people can get a free coffee every morning. So bringing that in, just to, people love free stuff. So if you can incorporate those type of things, they can also be good. And then, yeah, I guess they're probably the two things I'd mention in terms of how we're approaching it. But the other thing we're doing as well is kind of saying Monday to Friday is when we're kind of encouraging you to come in. Maybe pick a day or two then, so that you can bump into people that you might not otherwise would see. So just because I think if you give them too much freedom, no one will do anything. So you have to have some boundaries, but still give people the flexibility and choice.
Right. There was another
question. Oh, go on. Sorry, Sharon.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, if anyone else wants to share on that. Otherwise, there was a question from Natasha earlier, which I thought was really interesting. I'm not sure whether it's been answered. And this was to Laurie about whether the data captured about time in meetings includes the My Analytics focus time calendar blocking. And what was the rest of that question? Sorry, I've just got to pull it up. Oh yeah, and what about if you do blocking like out of office for lunch breaks and things like that? Is that included in that data, Laurie?
Oh, you're on mute, Laurie.
There are actually audio minutes, right? So I don't think it uses the calendar at all. So you can block all you like, but it's counting sort of when you're actually in an audio interaction, whether that's as a participant in a meeting or you're in a one-on-one call or what have you. So yeah, it doesn't use the My Analytics calendar to sort of try and work out how long you're in meetings. It seems to work out, that you're actually on an audio call. They're called audio minutes in the reports. Certainly, that's my understanding from the definitions that Microsoft uses, and it seems to sort out right based on certainly our own sort of experiences.
And
yeah,
that's the data
not the My
comes
Analytics.
out of the raw M365 reports.
Comes out of the raw
audio and video minutes.
Exactly. It's out of the raw reports. So no sort of calendar sort of mining or anything like that.
Thanks, Laurie, and thanks, Sharon, for bringing it up. That's really useful to know.
Yeah. In Matt, I mean, this return to the office. I've read I guess some of the more progressive organisations are sort of saying, well, you know, what are we going to use our office for? I hate people saying, oh, we're going to have it 2 days or 3 days in the office, 2 days not, or what have you. I mean, I think that's just dumb. I mean, it's sort of like, well, you know, which days are they? I mean, does it mean that, I mean, what happens if you all pick different days to be there? You know, and then of course it gets more and more complicated. So I have heard some of the more progressive organisations saying we do need the social connections. We want those. You know, I can recall when in my BHP days, they actually created a conference centre for the company. So it's like a hotel conference centre, and basically you'd book time where you wanted team meetings or bigger sessions, and you pretty much used it that way. And I can see organisations turning their offices into those sorts of things, so that when you do want to have a social get together, and some of it might not even be work related, it could be just to socialise. But you know, and that's why we're starting to hear people, you know, like people like Atlassian, you know, sort of no cubby holes or whatever. You know, it's a conference centre. It's basically, you know, they're keeping. Fortunately, they're cashed up enough to be able to keep paying whatever they have to pay for their property, but. I would think they're going to change shape quite a lot. One of our best clients is a company called Real Foundations, who consult in the real estate area, and they're very excited about this. You know, they also consult on digital habits for the real estate people as well, and yeah, they're very excited about what the possibilities are. They don't think that the actual amount of real estate that's going to be leased is actually going to be less. They're just excited by the fact it's going to be used differently. And they want to be part of that transition. So yeah, we're quite interested in following what they're doing actually in terms of real estate.
We're locked into long leases, and I'm sure leases. Other organisations are exactly the same. So it's not about being able to give up that real estate. We're stuck with it, right or wrong. Yeah. So it's how do you use it best?
Yeah, how do you use it best? You know, and sort of, and I guess what I'm saying is that they are reconfiguring, and Claudia was saying, even with Engage Squared, they're rethinking about what that's going to look like, you know, and the last thing you want is cubby holes where you just go and sit and do your virtual meetings in the same way you could do it at home, or why would you bother?
Yeah, I think, you know, thinking about that, like people, space, technology, you know, those spaces at work, and I think like this obviously costs like big money, but you know, thinking about what technology actually exists within your office spaces to enable hybrid work, so that people who are joining into a call remotely don't suddenly feel like they're forgotten about again. So I think it is a bit of a plan that needs to happen in a conversation around what do we want our employee experience to be, and that shouldn't just be driven by technology. That's a discussion with technology, with HR, with facilities coming together and actually, you know, creating that experience so people feel like they're productive and they're valued and they can contribute regardless of where they are.
We've got quite a few new case studies coming up, and a lot of people have spoken about how working digitally and working from home has leveled the playing field. So there was one organisation and one team members in Dubbo and everyone else is in Parramatta, and they feel like they never got heard. They were in like on audio in the corner of a conference room, never got heard. Suddenly now everything is digital. They've got the same voice as everybody else in their team for the first time ever. So really interesting of allowing that to continue to work when people are back in the office, or some people are and some aren't.
Yeah.
Emily, could you just share your screen? There's still time for a couple more questions if anyone wants to pop them in, but I also just want to tell you about the next webinar Engage Squared and Swoop have got running, and it's down for May the 4th, so we could not resist it being May the 4th to make it Star Wars theme. And Matt, it sort of does touch on some of the points that you were talking about it's not just about being in the office for the sake of being in the office. So we're sort of talking about hours worked, but it's about looking at the outcomes. So how can you see if those outcomes are coming, regardless of whether people are in the office or the hours that they work? So we're going to do this one just a little bit differently. We're calling it an online debate. So it's sort of a debate or even like a discussion panel more so. So it'll be Engage Squared, Swoop Analytics, and I think Microsoft are joining us for this one. So we'll also talk about how you can look at Viva Insights, My Analytics, Swoop Analytics, and how you can, see the difference between just being in the office and the hours worked as opposed to what outcomes you should be looking for. So we've already got the registration set up for that one. And there's another question coming in here. Sarah, did you want to jump in and ask a question? We've still got a minute to go.
Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you. Hope you can hear me. It was really about things I've been reading, not just about that sense of participation for people, but also being able to keep that playing field level in terms of how people are managed, in particular getting opportunities for stretch assignments, great projects, promotion. We've obviously had that playing field leveled by this remote working situation, and if we're trying to move to hybrid, how does hybrid working in terms of making sure people working primarily remotely don't miss out on those opportunities for exposure, which tend to happen in the office? So I'd just be interested in the group's thoughts on that.
I often promote Yammer as a way of people that are working remotely to start to build their profile beyond their day-to-day work team. Because Yammer is about communities of practice, people that are aligned with particular disciplines, getting known in your organisation, especially if you're a large organisation. And I think, certainly in my working career, where I've been in companies with people distributed all around the world, some of these people in remote areas really don't get much airspace. In fact, it's only through the digital communities that they actually get seen at all, other than the odd visit by a general manager once a year or something like that. So certainly I would be promoting to people, if you want to be seen, you need to contribute. You certainly can't be passive. You need to sort of, show what you've got, and I think Yammer is one of those places that's there for that. So,
thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you did want to continue on with the chats or stay online to have a little bit more of a chat, you're welcome to do so, or just pop some more questions in and we can get back to you. But thank you very much, everybody, for attending our webinar.
Thanks,
okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.